It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome Chris Cousens, and apologies if I'm misspelling that, from the University of Glasgow. Recently got into Glasgow, so congrats for that as well. With a talk on large language models and large language games, and very much looking forward to this. I'm really a bit of a sports guy, so looking forward to your talk. Thanks.
Uh, Thanks very much, Andre. I'm going to immediately disappoint by having not that many sports references. The title might be slightly misleading, but we'll see how we go. So my goal with this presentation is going to be more to outline a puzzle or a problem than it will be to necessarily solve it. I have some thoughts about possible solutions, which are kind of tentative, and I'll leave those more towards the end. But the main thing I'm going to try to motivate is attention towards a problem that I think is getting often overlooked in we might call it panic, we might call it attention given to large language models and the effects that they might have on the world we live in, really. My main concern isn't with the illocutionary force of the output of large language models themselves, although I have some thoughts about that. But what I'm actually really interested in is the possibility that the proliferation of large language models, especially in online communication, is going to undermine our own ability to do things with words. So the effect of large language models on the much larger language games that we're also playing. And now I'm realizing I can't actually change the slide from within here. Bear with me one moment.
If you'd like to exit full screen, that'll probably work.
Yes, that sounds good. Now I'm not sharing the screen at all.
Correct.
All right, let's try this again. Is that changing the image at all?
So we're still seeing the first slide with your name and title. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that looks better.
Okay. Yes.
Great.
Also good.
Sorry about that. So, some spoiler warnings. I'm going to make lots of sometimes oblique references to various things from pop culture. So, if you're into science fiction films or cricket results, there might be some spoilers ahead, but they're all from quite a while ago. So, you've had plenty of time to be up to date. The puzzle that I'm really concerned with is what happens to our online communication now that large language models, and especially as we see really frequently the proliferation of like chat GPT content, what effect that's going to have on the online speech acts that we are trying to perform. I'll try to suggest that certain approaches within speech act theory maybe can't explain the puzzle or can't really give a good enough account of how online communication or how online speech acts are still going to be possible if we don't afford large language models illocutionary force. Or to put it another way, I think that if we don't treat the output of large language models as having illocutionary force, we might have to give up on some of the illocutionary force of our own speech acts. Unless we change our preferred theory of speech acts to more of a conventionalist account. But I think that's probably going to end up giving large language models sort of illocutionary power. So the puzzle, I think, arises when we start to compare different ways that AI and large language models are getting used and getting treated in online communication. ChatGPT and AI is this cool, new, mysterious, sexy thing that we're being told is going to revolutionize the world. And depending on where you live, It's we're being told that it needs to be embedded into just loads of everyday operations of things, whether that's into your workflow in your workplace. The British government recently has said they want to invest massively in AI. It's this new big cool thing that's going to be everywhere. Something else that's everywhere, but maybe not as cool and mysterious and new, is work emails. Uh, we might be familiar with these, quite a mundane sort of online communicative tool. And my thought is that once we combine the two, as it seems like is starting to happen, we're going to see some pretty awkward things occur. What happens once our bosses, for example, start to use AI in the composition of workplace emails, memos, and the like? The worry I have is that because the output of large language models is often, from the audience's perspective, indistinguishable to text that would have been human generated, it's going to make it very difficult for us to maintain sort of confidence in online speech acts. So I'm going to sketch out 5 different versions of the same sort of puzzle and hopefully try to generate something we need to, a problem we need to solve. So the first version, I get an email from my boss ordering me to finish some reports by the end of the day tomorrow. Have I been given an order? Yeah, I think so. Bosses can order people. They've sent an email. We're pretty used to online speech acts being possible. Alternatively, I get an email generated automatically by an AI program that my boss uses, ordering me to finish some reports. So the same content of the order, but instead of it being sent by my boss, it's sent by an AI program that they use. And there's no indication that the boss is aware of the generation of the email in the first place. Have I been given an order? Maybe we start to think it's less clear that that's the case, especially if the boss who this AI program is sort of representing or proxying or purporting to speak on behalf of, if there's no oversight or speaker intention anywhere in the story here, we might want to say something like that there isn't an order, or there's at least some kind of very imperfect order that's occurring. I think it gets kind of worse than that. We might think of some of these kinds of scenarios. I again received the same email with the same order. In this version of the scenario, my boss uses the same AI assistant to compose some of the emails that they send. But I also know that sometimes she composes her own emails, and I don't know if she sent this one, and I have no way of knowing whether it came from my boss, whose order would be felicitous in all of the normal ways, or if it's been sent by an AI assistant that my boss may have had no direct oversight of, as in the previous scenario. So the main thing that changes here is a sort of we're in a different epistemic position. We know less about the authorship of the email, and we can't derive it from the email itself. Another interesting wrinkle that I need to think more about, but I want to mention because, again, something that I think is kind of being under-described at the moment. We could imagine my boss using some kind of word generation or email generation. Generation's the wrong word. Composing their emails with the assistance of a program like Grammarly, and maybe they just always accept the suggestions of the AI assistant without thinking. And so maybe this program suggests replacing, it would be great if you could finish these reports by tomorrow with finish these reports by tomorrow, kind of replacing some of the text to make it more concise, but in the process, changing what might have been a request into something that we might think looks like an order. I've taken to calling this sort of hybrid speech. It's not synthetic speech, but it's also not, at least when the person sending the email doesn't like reflect on the changes, maybe doesn't even look at them, just hits sort of accept all or something like that. There's maybe something else going on here that we'll need to think about at some point. Uh, and possibly the worst epistemic position we could be in relation to these might be if my boss is secretly using an AI assistant to do all of this. Maybe I don't know that it's even possible that their email could have been AI generated. Maybe We could go even further. Maybe my boss's computer has been hacked and she doesn't even know that the AI assistant has been installed, sending these emails purporting to be from her. My focus isn't so much on the speaker end of things. I'm really interested in what I'm supposed to do when I get that email because they're all going to be indistinguishable. In some cases, it looks like I've been given an order. Everything's worked as it should. In other cases, it seems like something, or at least to me, it seems like something has gone wrong. And I'll be really interested in Q&A to find out if your intuitions sort of match here. So when I know that the email was sent by a human, we might think a nice ordinary speech act has occurred. We can do speech acts online. That's not super controversial. And if we're resistant to saying that large language models can perform speech acts, or if we're resistant to saying that an AI assistant could have the authority to send an order, then we might think that if we know that the email is AI generated, no orders occurred. You might not have that sort of theoretical position, but at least a decent number of people I've spoke to have something like that as a first intuitive response. If we know it's a human speaker, a speech act is definitely on the table. If we know it's AI, maybe not. But when we don't know what's going on, when we don't know who the author is, then I don't really know exactly what we're supposed to say. And I'm trying to tease that out in what will hopefully end up being this paper, but it might turn out to be like this several papers or this puzzle that I spend years working on and never actually quite work out what the right answer is. So I'm trying to work out what we're supposed to do as the audience in positions where we get these kind of emails, but we don't know if AI is involved. And I think that because of the current output of large language models being hard to identify, and because of their proliferation and easy access to these, we're going to increasingly be in these kinds of precarious epistemic positions where we just don't know the authorship of the content, or we can't be as confident that we're engaging with authentic rather than synthetic content, if that's the right way to distinguish the two. My labeling there is probably not quite right. So, I won't go too much into the kind of nuts and bolts of speech act theory. We've had lots of really good explanations of some of this already. I'm just going to point out a couple of highlights for how I see how I see this fitting into the puzzle that I'm trying to solve. And the question is really, where does illocutionary force come from for my purposes here? What is it that makes a promise, or an order? Um, we have lots of things that get kind of put into the story for where a speech act comes from or where illocutionary force comes from. Some of these felicity conditions, like needing authority to properly make an order, that's pretty familiar. And we might think that the question as to whether I've been given an order in these puzzle scenarios is going to rest on whether or not the AI programs can have authority, proxy authority, or something like that. But I think we can kind of head that problem off at the pass because there's lots of other speech acts that don't seem to need special authority like an order. We could run the same puzzle set of scenarios, but with a promise rather than an order. And we could ask if a promise has been made in each of those scenarios. So the two features of illocutionary force, or the potential sources for illocutionary force that I want to focus on, are the intention of the speaker and the uptake of the audience, because quite roughly, that allows us to describe the kind of speech act theory literature into two separate camps. I think this is a very rough gloss. There's a lot more subtlety in the positions people are articulating. But one way to sketch out where illocutionary force comes from might be to look at either the speaker intending to perform a certain speech act or the audience giving uptake to an utterance as a certain kind of speech act. So what makes a promise or an order an order? If you think it comes down to the intention of the speaker, as MacDonald characterizes this, a sort of intentionalist theory of speech acts, you might say that, well, an utterance counts as a promise primarily because the speaker intended to perform the speech act of promising and to be taken to have performed that speech act. On the other hand, you might think that 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 too often goes wrong. Quill Cookler points this out with the concept of discursive injustice, where people can seemingly respond to an utterance in a way that the speaker didn't intend, and it seems to have the effect or the impact on the obligations and the norms that people are responding to as the new kind of speech act. So maybe speaker intention isn't doing the work to determine whether an utterance is a promise or not, but rather the uptake of the audience, the way we respond to it. So if those are our two kind of main camps, I'm going of speech act theory. Maybe that's not the best way to characterize it for our purpose or for my purposes today. It's very rough and ready, but that's what I'm going with. I'm going to try to show that the intentionalist view, that whether or not the AI program intends to give me an order, that that's not really going to give us a satisfying answer to these kind of unclear puzzle scenarios. I'll suggest that maybe a conventionalist account is more promising. I've got some independent concerns with those and my own version of that, or maybe a preferred view that if I get time to, I'll sketch out towards the end of my talk. So I've already talked a little bit about the role of authority, and I did that out of order because I was going to make a nice joke about Judge Dredd having the authority to issue orders. You know, he can also intend to issue the order, and the recipient can give it uptake as an order. On the other hand, other kinds of judges may not have the appropriate authority, this being the fictional Judge Judy, or maybe fictional is the wrong word, but someone without the proper authority of a judge. Uh, the idea is that if an order is successful, I have to do certain things in response to it. If the AI program has issued me an order, that changes what I am now supposed to do. Whereas if it hasn't, then no such change in my obligations has occurred. And so I think this is really important for explaining how we use speech acts online because we just do all the time. So a problem here might be if we're trying to adopt the intentionalist view and say that, well, we can kind of explain whether an order has occurred or not based on whether the sender of the email, intended to order me and had the appropriate authority, perhaps. But as some of the speakers in this workshop have suggested, LLMs don't seem to intend, or at least not in the same way that we do. In the past, when I've given this talk, I've really flat-footedly just said large language models don't have intention, so on the intentionalist view, they can't perform speech acts. I think that's too fast. But there is certainly a sense in which the intending of LLMs doesn't look at all like ours. Mitch suggested that maybe something like having a goal could be an appropriate sort of replacement for intention, something like that. But and we could ask, what is the goal of large language models? It's not to give me an order. It's not to get me to do certain things. In as much as we're aware of like them having a goal, it might seem to be something like predicting the next token or responding to a certain prompt, which doesn't seem to be structured the same way. I think there's lots of ways we could maybe get around this, or think differently about the role of intention here. One that I'm quite attracted to is the idea that perhaps different speech acts require different kinds of intention. Maybe for a promise, you need to have a certain kind of uh, an intention to enter into a certain kind of obligation. Maybe for other kinds of utterances, especially sort of conventional ceremonial speech acts, maybe you need a different kind of intention or perhaps none at all. So if we were to follow that through, we might say something like maybe intention is sufficient for some speech acts, but not necessary for speech acts qua speech acts. However, if we take the thought that large language models don't intend like we do, and that they perhaps don't intend in the appropriate way to be giving me orders via email, uh, then we might be left with this sort of problem. When my boss sends me an email with an order, I'm given an order, but when an AI program sends me an email with an order, I haven't been given an order. If I don't know that, and the intention of the speaker kind of settles well, the illocutionary force of the utterance, I might just be left guessing as to whether an order has occurred or not. I'm just trying to work out as best I can who actually wrote the email, if that is in fact what the puzzle turns on. If that's going to tell me whether an order has actually happened, I just need to know who the author is. And given the proliferation of large language models and how important speech acts in general are in the workplace, not just for giving orders, but giving promotions, hiring people, firing them, and the immense stakes that those kinds of decisions have on people's lives and livelihoods, I think it's pretty bad news if we can't be confident that online speech acts are, in fact, the speech acts that they might have previously been before the advent of large language models. That's even worse when we think about AI acting in error. Uh, there's lots of different ways that might happen. One might be that the AI email generator sends me an order to do something my boss doesn't want me to do, for example, maybe something illegal. There's lots of ways AI can go wrong. Here's one way that AI has gone wrong for me recently when I was just Googling, trying to grab Mitch and Jan's paper. I was given the AI overview suggestion that Green and Mikkel in 2022 likely refers to the American ice dancing pair, Caroline Green and Michael Parsons. Now, unless there's a couple of strange double lives going on, I suspect that there's an error here in the output of the AI. Now, Google AI overview is not particularly good or sophisticated compared to some other AI models. I include this as a sort of humorous instance of where AI can go wrong. But given the stakes of workplace speech acts, if we're allowing AI sort of into the workflow that leads to those speech acts, that's a worry, especially if we're then guessing as to whether something is or isn't AI generated, if we should or shouldn't comply with it. It's even worse when we realize, or as has been reported, not necessarily confirmed, but if AI programs and algorithms are being used to fire federal workers, for example, you might get an email firing you that the decision to fire you might have had no human oversight, and the email that has been sent might also be automatically generated. Uh, and yet, at least in some contexts, that seems to count as a genuine firing. And so that's why I think we're in trouble if we're not able to have some kind of confidence in the illocutionary force of the online utterances that we encounter. So what I've tried to sketch out so far is like the kind of puzzle. When we have these online authors, online speech acts with unknown authorship, especially because large language model output can be quite hard to identify, we don't know who is speaking. And if we think that LLMs don't intend in the right way, then maybe we're just guessing as to whether we've been ordered or not. The alternative would be to take intention maybe somewhat out of the picture. Uh, again a bit rushed, but to suggest that maybe we should look more closely at something other than intention for explaining what makes an utterance a certain kind of speech act. Perhaps that is, as the conventionalist picture would say, more to do with the utterance matching certain conventions. As Spitzer puts it, that we could maybe look for illocutionary patterns. An order is supposed to have certain kinds of phrases said to perform an order, and then it needs to have certain kinds of uptake. It needs to be, recognized as the right kind of token. The speaker's authority needs to be recognized. If you've got all of the different pieces together, if the utterance matches all, and including its uptake, matches the right pattern of an order, then we could say, well, an order has occurred. Lance and Kukla put this in terms of input and output. If all of the input is appropriate and it leads to the right output, then maybe we say that speech act has occurred. And there's been some more recent attempts by people like Lucy McDonald and Harrison and Tanter to point to maybe a more social explanation of this. It's not just the target of the speech act whose utterance is part of the relevant output to match the illocutionary pattern, but maybe it needs to be more widespread, that maybe the discursive community or third party bystanders might also play a role in uh, providing the right sort of pattern of outputs to make it the case that an utterance turns out to be a promise or an order. Mentioned earlier that I have some independent suspicions with some of the way that this conventionalist account is set up. And this is where I'm getting very rushed and tentative in terms of my sort of positive view, or maybe the way I think we should go in explaining the force of large language model utterances. One problem I have with the conventionalist view is that they often seem to require more things to happen after the utterance itself to settle what kind of speech act it is. So, on Kukla's view, for example, there needs to be a sort of accessible response from the audience to kind of publicly demonstrate that the utterance has received uptake. And it's that public demonstration that is going to settle whether an utterance counts as an order, for example. But we run into scenarios, especially when we're having, Zoom calls, for example, where maybe a Zoom call cuts out after an utterance, but before there's a chance for public uptake, like a publicly available response. So if my boss gives me an order and I don't have a chance to respond before the Zoom call cuts out, at least to me, it seems like an order has occurred. It's not that an order happens later when I do something publicly to kind of ratify it. The order just happens, at least in that case, in and of itself. And so I think maybe we shouldn't be looking for the pattern of the illocutionary pattern that makes an utterance a certain kind of speech act in inputs and outputs over time, but perhaps in something else. The something else that I suggest is looking at the obligations or the norm changes that are brought about by the utterance. I'd sort of model this on Lewis's notion of conversational score. So rather than trying to look for a publicly available response that looks like the response we're supposed to have to a promise or an order, we might instead think about the change in norms or obligations that is supposed to have happened, what effect the utterance should have on its audience. And we sort of adopt the position of like an umpire or a referee in a game to determine that. So Lewis says that conversations are a bit like games, and every utterance is like a move in that game. Which moves are permissible depend upon the rules of the game and the score at a given point in time. So, what is permissible when it comes to speech acts? Speech acts are often changing permissibility, what we are and aren't supposed to do. An order is supposed to change what is permissible for me. It's no longer permissible for me to not do what has been ordered. And so the proposal roughly is that if the email I receive changes what I am supposed to do, it changes my obligations in the way that an order should, then we should call it an order. It's close enough. Regardless of whether it's been sent on, regardless of whether I know who sent it. And this is kind of the spot I'm in now, trying to work out the best way to explain what should I, as the recipient of the email, do in response to such an email with unknown authorship. How is the utterance, how is the email supposed to change my obligations? Does it matter, or in what way does it matter if a human or a large language model has sent it? Does it matter, or in what way does it matter if I know who has sent it? I think this is all going to be kind of difficult to sketch out. The speaker and the audience might also, and often do, just disagree about what speech act has been performed or about what obligations are supposed to have been generated by a particular utterance. So I think that's just where I'm going to leave things for the talk today. I'll stress that I gestured in the most brief possible way at my tentative suggestion for a way forward, a way to explain all of this through conversational score, and it's way under described here, so I don't expect anyone to be convinced by that yet. What I would hopefully have managed to do, though, is at least convince you that there's a problem or a puzzle that we're going to need to resolve. What are we supposed to do when we receive an email that could have been generated by a large language model? What illocutionary force does it have? What illocutionary force should it have? And what might we, as audience members, or what might us, we as a society do to try and give us the sort of confidence we might need to continue engaging with online utterances as speech acts in the way that we have been. Or if instead we need to just say, look, online speech acts can't really do those anymore because we just don't know who or what has sent the email or the order. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris, for your talk. So now let's begin the Q&A. Anybody in the room has any questions? Mitch, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Chris. I enjoyed that talk. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
So I'm still not sure I'm seeing what the puzzle is, or at least what I'm supposed to be puzzled about. I would have thought that one thing that could be helpful to try to figure out what's going on if I'm suspicious that there might be some AI generation and something that at least verbally has is that people can use machines as proxies. As say, it seems there's some plausibility in the idea that artificial agent could be used as a proxy to represent my own interests, my own plans, my own requests, and other future acts. So if I've sort of deputized an AI to do work for me, and I've given it a sort of general approval, the orders that it sends out are going to flow from the workflow, the sort of obligations of priorities that we have to achieve today or this week or this quarter, then it seems reasonable to suppose that in some case, in many of those cases, when even if I know as a recipient that there's a machine that generated something that's got the verbal shape of a command, then I might still know, well, there's no problem. I don't care what that machine has intention to have, because this machine is serving as a representative of the boss, and the boss is aware of that and is given it her approval and so forth. So in that case, it seems pretty clear to me that it's an order. And so I think some of the sort of problems that you're raising, I think, are soluble by Field's notion of proxy. Others, I think, we just don't know enough to be able to answer the question what sort of force, if any, I'm put under. But it seems to me when you said at one point, after going through the 5 cases, all those 5 things that I see are indistinguishable on my inbox or whatever. Well, they're indistinguishable on a superficial level, but I want to know the etiology of them before I can decide what to do. That seems like it's pretty generally the case. And speech act theory is known for 50 years or more that you can't read the future and force off the sentence. So once we think about the etiology, we might find that, for example, there was a proxy that got the causal history of the assignments, and that's enough for my purposes to make it an order. Whether I want to follow it is another question. It's got the force that you're asking
about. Thanks very much. Sorry, a truck went past just over the last last sentence or so. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so it's got I think I was saying, it's got the form. Yeah, so as long as I know the etiology of the sentence, that's going to help a lot. Solve all cases? Surely not. But in some cases, if I know that a machine has been deputized by my boss to perform acts that she finds too mundane for herself, then I think she's given sort of a blanket approval of the things that the machine utters, as long as it doesn't start going rogue or something. The things that it sends to me, I'm going to take to be orders or something with at least imperatival force. Whether or not I choose to accept it is another question. I mean, as a journal editor, I often get reminders from the Springer Nature online system. Please find referees for this submission. To which I look back at it and say, no, I don't feel like it. Delete. So that I get an order doesn't necessarily mean that I'm under strong pressure to do anything about it, but it still has the force of imperative.
But yeah, thanks. That's helpful. And I guess the first and least interesting way I could respond is to say, yeah, that I need to craft the sort of prompt example a bit more clearly and articulate the role that proxies can play. I think that's definitely a plausible explanation for some of the situations that we might be in. I wonder if the audience needs to know that there is a sort of proxy that's being used for that for things to still work out happily, or whether there is something still going wrong if my boss, for example, just starts using an AI program that doesn't go rogue as a proxy or to do some of their work for them. I'm not sure what my kind of initial thoughts are on that. in terms of the kinds of online utterances that we're currently interacting with, I think that that might certainly cover a decent number of the problems or the concerns that I have. If we can just say, when someone decides to use an AI program as a proxy, there's a sort of institutional convention that its speech counts as the speech of the person who it's emailing on behalf of, or perhaps on behalf of the company. And we can generate lots of sort of authority claims, for example, off the back of that. Where I'm still a little concerned about, at least at the moment, is whether we are going to be able to get the same kind of result when it comes to and this is more kind of hypothetical, at least as far as I'm aware of, AI programs in those kind of positions, as you say, going rogue or acting outside of the scope that they're supposed to have, maybe impersonating someone that they're not supposed to be impersonating, or maybe being activated or introduced not by my boss, but perhaps by, their boss or some other kind of managerial figure, or if it's kind of surreptitiously inserted by someone as a prank or as a sort of act of sabotage. These are much less relevant to some of the kind of real world emails that I'm currently receiving. But my worry is that the more that we integrate these things into our ordinary working day, that the less easily we'll be able to track the sort of proxy relation in a way that might be satisfying to us as the recipient of the email. Now, whether or not that recipient satisfaction matters for illocutionary force, I'll need to think some more about that though. I've said some things in response. I definitely haven't addressed everything. That's maybe my first sort of take.
Yeah, I have please.
Sorry, I'll come a bit closer so you
Yeah,
can
no,
hear
no,
me.
no. We can see.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for your talk, Chris. I really enjoyed it, and I thought there was a nice range of different vignettes to puzzle over there. So I guess I wanted to maybe pick up on something that came up in your response to Mitch's question. So I'm also kind of tempted to take a proxy type view to some of these, like settling some of these puzzles. But then you brought up the case of the boss who starts using the AI without announcing it to you, so you don't know whether she's using AI or not. And in that case, you might think of it kind of on the model of a Gettier problem or something. So there might be you might be correct that it has the force of an order, but not for the reasons that you thought. So it might be you thought it was just that she intended to give an order and wrote the sentence. It actually turns out that she had employed the AI to produce text on her behalf and given this blanket endorsement, this was discussed before. So it's still the case that it is an order, but just not for the reasons that you thought. I mean, maybe Gettier case is not a perfect analogy, but yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea, particularly because, and this is gesturing to much wider thoughts I have about how we talk about speech acts that I really haven't fully developed yet. But I like the idea that we can have maybe multiple realizability for a lot of speech acts, is perhaps one way to put it, that there might be quite a few different illocutionary patterns, perhaps, that could each be appropriately described as an order. Austin has a lot of trouble trying to taxonomize everything and draw perfect distinctions between each of these. So there might also be some overlap. We might see an illocutionary pattern and it might sit between a couple of descriptions. So I like that as a sort of potential explanation for where illocutionary force comes from. I'm When it comes to what we're supposed to do as the recipient, I think it still does make a difference, maybe in terms of the strength of the order or the precise obligations that are enacted. If my boss intends to send a specific order, or a proxy program sends an order on their behalf that they did not sort of reflectively endorse. But that might take us out of the realm of speech act theory and into some other kind of talk of obligations. So I need to think more about that as well. But I definitely like the idea of an order occurring in but not in the way that I thought, because orders don't necessarily have just one really tight set of felicity conditions, something like that.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Yeah, are there any other questions from the room or the online? Oh, okay, Mitch again.
But I want to make sure no one else. How about online? Does anybody have any questions online?
No, I don't see any raising hands. So.
I'm back, Chris.
Also, Yuan Muntan has one. Do you want to let him go?
Yes,
And yeah,
please.
please, Yuan Muntan.
Yes, thank you. That was a great talk. I never thought about this more seriously, but I want to ask a clarificatory question here about what is the situation with this case in which you start to write an email and you correct it with a AI grammar spell checker like Grammarly and stuff like that. It looks like the Grammarly spell check follows some linguistic rules rather than adding new ideas to your emails. So in some sense, I'm curious if you can clarify a little bit if a spell checker can add some intentions or conventions to what I already wrote there. And imagine I have a perfect English teacher and she comes and spell check my email as a human being, right, rather than a machine. What would be the difference in this case? Because I'm just curious if this kind of like spell checker who's doing the job for you would be different than an AI. It's just a little clarification here.
Yeah, so I think that it's not so different in that particular case. Um, if the person sending the email kind of checks over the suggested changes and endorses them, then I don't think we run into the problems I'm trying to sketch out. And if they just do whatever the spell checker says, whether it's human or AI, then we potentially end up in the same kind of situation regardless. With the maybe the upshot that then it seems like other people can meddle in the illocutionary force of our utterances in slightly strange ways. Now, I'm on the record as being totally okay with that. I think that other people can meddle with the illocutionary force of our speech, perhaps a lot more than we sometimes realize. But and sorry, then I lost the yeah, and I also think that Grammarly suggesting even very slight changes that keep most of the meaning of a sentence uh, can still change its illocutionary force, especially when it's trying to do things like make your writing more concise or more forceful, as it will sometimes suggest. You know, this is quite passive. You should say it more strongly, for example. And one thing that can then happen is that the phrasing changes from the phrasing we might associate with maybe a polite request, and it suggests instead say something really strongly that might look more like a command or an order. And if we are then sending it without reflecting on that, that probably puts us in the sort of maybe the proxy position that Mitch was describing earlier. That said, I think that this kind of speech or this kind of utterance that's going to have sort of both LLM and human fingerprints on it. I don't know yet what best to say about that, but I think it's something interesting to continue thinking about, and we're going to encounter it more and more in our actual lives as every program under the sun tries to embed AI to advertise itself as being AI powered and cool and new and charge a lot more money for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Mitch, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So, I myself don't find the Kukla McDonald line of thought about speech acts particularly plausible. But rather than argue about that, I just wanted to think a little bit about your suggestion that if your version of a kind of conventional approach, according to which if others take me to be committed in various ways, then the relevant illocution has occurred, or it says it has in effect occurred. I guess what I'm wondering about, at least one part of my question is, how general is that going to be? That is to say, one part of commitment has to do with the psychological state that's normally expressed by a speech act. I don't think all speech acts express psychological states. But for example, I think that no one but I can apologize. Because even if I'm not sincere, I'm at least expressing I'm at least expressing my regret, or my act is expressive of regret. I don't know that anybody can apologize on my behalf. We do have a practice of sometimes parents apologizing for what things young children do, but I think it's probably a different case. It's something more like apologizing for letting my young child do that to your house, whatever. And so likewise, in the working world, we hear about people who report that they've been, in American English, we have voluntold, so that, everybody else, they weren't in the meeting, but everybody decided that George, or whatever, was going to do the job because he wasn't there to push back. So that's going to come close to his being ordered. He'll certainly have been given the commitments, but I'm not sure if he was in fact ordered, or whether the result of the voluntelling was something more like in effect ordered. So do you care about the difference between being actually ordered or being in effect ordered? Is that something that matters to you? Or being a little bit sort of how much my milieu can make it the case that either I have produced or have been the recipient of a speech act?
Yeah. So to give the really short version of my view, it's that the being in effect ordered is basically good enough to call it being ordered. And I am not sure to what degree I can sort of defend that as a general principle, but I think that at least for a lot of the purposes we put our talk of speech acts to, that actually does capture what's kind of critical, like whether the obligations come about through a normally felicitous order or through some other kind of voluntelling, for at least a lot of purposes, it won't make a practical difference. And so we may as well say that I had been ordered, but I recognize that that's going to lead to me needing to be pretty, in some cases, kind of vague or unclear about what constitutes an order, what are its felicity conditions, and I haven't got a great way to sort of resolve that issue to hand. I think that we probably should be pretty permissive about ascribing illocutionary force of these sorts of kinds to utterances that don't fit particularly traditional or I was going to say conventional, but McGowan uses the phrase like Austinian illocutions, maybe something in that ballpark, that we should be pretty liberal in calling things that generate order-like obligations an order, because that's going to be most useful to us in talking about how we've been using, in how we're using speech acts to bring about different sort of normative statuses. And maybe that talk of normative statuses as being the business of speech acts is me buying more into the Kukla view than you would, Mitch, and perhaps even more than I should. But that's another one that I'll need to think about a more robust response to, and hopefully come up with one.
Thanks.
Great, fantastic. Thanks so much. Other questions, comments, or joinders online or in the room? And if not, please join me in thanking Chris for a wonderful talk.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.